A small town in Alabama, the beginning of Maria. Tucked away in the heart of Alabama, the small town of Pine Creek seemed to move at its own gentle pace. Rows of old oak trees lined the streets, and most folks knew not only each other's names, but also the stories that made up their lives. The air was thick with the scent of magnolia in the spring, and heavy with history year-round. There weren't many secrets here, at least not for long. In a modest rented cottage on the edge of town lived Maria Turner. Maria, in her early 30s, was known for her unwavering work ethic and quiet grace. Every morning before sunrise, she packed her son Eli's lunch, roused him gently for school, and watched him get on the yellow bus before heading off to her own day's work. It wasn't an easy life. Money was always tight, and as a single mom, she rarely had time for herself. But Maria faced each day with steady determination. Neighbors admired her for how she never complained, even when things got tough. She picked up extra shifts at the local diner, never missed a parent-teacher conference, and was always the first to offer help when a neighbor fell sick or a friend's car broke down. Despite her own struggles, Maria believed in treating others with kindness, a trait that made her both respected and quietly beloved in Pine Creek. Maria hadn't planned on living in Pine Creek forever. Life, however, had a way of narrowing down choices. She had once dreamed of running her own bakery in Birmingham, maybe even going back to school. But when Eli's father left without warning, taking their savings with him, Maria's dreams were put on hold. She moved to Pine Creek, where rent was lower and people still left their doors unlocked at night. Even with the shadows of hardship trailing her, Maria found comfort in the simple routines of the town, exchanging small talk with Mrs. Lang at the grocery store, waving at Sheriff Daniels during his morning rounds, or sitting with Eli on the porch during the rare, quiet evenings. Pine Creek became more than a place to simply survive. It became home, a place where Maria began quietly rebuilding her sense of hope. Underneath her calm exterior, Maria carried a deep well of resilience. She never let her worries show when Eli was watching. She wanted him to feel safe, to know that even though their life looked different from others, it was still filled with love and possibility. In many ways, Maria saw herself as both roots and wings for her son. She kept him grounded in stability, but always encouraged his curiosity and laughter. Life in Pine Creek was modest, sometimes unforgiving, but Maria was determined to carve out a future for herself and her son, no matter what the world might throw in their way. Unbeknownst to her, this small town, so full of routine and unspoken stories, would soon become the backdrop for her own tale of courage and vindication. The X returns one ordinary Tuesday afternoon, just as autumn leaves began tumbling along Pine Creek's winding roads. A sight Maria hadn't expected to see again pulled up next door. A shiny black truck dusted with road grit, but familiar all the same. Behind the wheel was Jimmy Harris, her ex-boyfriend. It had been years since their messy breakup, and the town had all but forgotten his reckless charm. Now, he was back, wearing expensive boots, a flashy new watch, and an easy grin that had once made her heart skip. Jimmy strolled into Pine Creek as if he'd never left. He made a show of buying coffee for old friends, tipping big at the local diner, even stopping to flirt with the cashier at the grocery store. But beneath the smooth talk and eager handshakes, Maria sensed the same slyness that had always driven a wedge between them. Jimmy had a gift for telling people exactly what they wanted to hear, always angling for some advantage. At first, Jimmy played the role of a changed man, seeking out Maria with practiced innocence. He offered apologies for the past, chuckling about old mistakes, as if they were nothing but harmless stories to reminisce about over coffee. Maria, however, felt her guard rise each time he appeared. She refused his invitations to dinner, brushed off his compliments, and kept conversations with him short and polite. It didn't take long for his mask to slip. When he realized Maria wouldn't fall for his old charms or offer any help, financial or otherwise, his demeanor shifted. Where there was once warmth, there was now cold calculation in his eyes. Jimmy, angered by her independence and unwillingness to forgive, began to spread half-truths and outright lies about her. The rumors started quietly at first. A sly comment at the post office, a concerned whisper at church. Soon, they snowballed. Maria heard stories circulating, stories that questioned her character, her parenting, even the reasons she had ended things with Jimmy years ago. Some folks avoided her at the grocery store, while others eyed her with suspicion as she picked up Eli from school. What stung the most wasn't the loss of acquaintances or even the damage to her reputation, but the way Jimmy exploited the town's trust. He positioned himself as a misunderstood man just trying to make amends, while casting Maria as cold and heartless. The manipulation felt as personal as it did public, and Maria realized Jimmy's true objective wasn't her forgiveness, but her utter humiliation. Through it all, Maria carried herself with as much dignity as she could muster, refusing to let Jimmy see her pain. But the betrayal ran deep, deeper, perhaps, than even Jimmy realized. In the quiet moments after Eli was asleep, Maria resolved that she would not let his lies become her legacy. As Jimmy endeared himself to the townsfolk, she began silently taking stock of who he really was and what he was doing. In Pine Creek, secrets never stayed buried forever. And Jimmy, for all his bravado, had no idea just how strong Maria had become. The storm breaks. The first signs of trouble appeared as mere ripples. A neighbor's greeting that was a little too brief, a friend's call that never came. At first, Maria tried to brush off the tension building around her. She told herself it was just her imagination, the product of a stressful week and Jimmy's sudden return. But soon, the tension grew impossible to ignore. Pine Creek, for all its charm, was a place where rumors traveled faster than the morning school bus, and Maria now found herself at the center of a tightening storm. It began innocently enough. Mrs. Carter, who usually lingered at her mailbox, exchanging recipes and town gossip with Maria, started giving vague, sympathetic looks instead. The conversations with regulars at the local diner grew stilted. Maria noticed there were fewer smiles, fewer invitations to church or community gatherings. Even the checker at the grocery store, once chatty and attentive, began to treat Maria like just another customer. At first, Eli didn't notice the difference, but Maria did. She felt it deep in her bones. The slow, creeping isolation that comes not from actions, but from whispered words. The things that had made Pine Creek feel like home, a neighbor's wave, the sense of being known, were evaporating before her eyes. The world suddenly felt colder, and Maria's safe harbor became an unfamiliar shore. It was Jimmy's doing, she had no doubt. The man had always been slick with words. Now, he was weaponizing them, twisting people's perceptions, invoking memories of their failed relationship, and filling in the blanks with his own brand of charm. It didn't take much to poison a well. The whispers grew bolder. Someone left an anonymous note on the windshield of her car. "Traitor" was all it read. At the diner, Maria sensed eyes tracking her every move. Conversations paused, whenever she walked by, then resumed, voices suddenly muted, heavy with implication. One afternoon, she caught her coworker, Janet, reading something on her phone and glancing nervously at Maria. When Maria came closer, Janet quickly put her phone away and offered a forced smile. What made it worse was the ambiguity. No one confronted her outright. Instead, rumors slithered through Pine Creek. Maria was a bad mother. She was after other men's husbands. She'd driven Jimmy away years earlier with her cruelty, and now she wanted revenge. The exact words were never clear, but the meaning coiled around Maria like barbed wire. Then it grew tangible. At the elementary school, Eli came home upset one day, saying that some kids had started teasing him, whispering things about his mother. Maria's heart broke as she saw how the cruelty of rumor spared no one, not even a child. Eli stopped asking to play with his friends after school and grew quieter at dinner. Maria fought to reassure him, to shield him with stories and hugs, but the damage was done, a silent, invisible wound. A few weeks into the onslaught, Maria was called into her boss's office at the diner. The manager, a wiry man named Frank, who was usually more interested in sports scores than staff drama, avoided her gaze as he explained that some customers had complained about Maria's attitude. There were vague allegations. Nothing concrete, nothing official, but enough. Maria was told that they had to let her go, just until things settled down. He shrugged as he handed her the last paycheck, as if all this ugliness were a thunderstorm, rather than a force set in motion by human hands. The news hit Maria like a punch. That booth by the window, the clatter of dishes, even the sting of spilled coffee, all of it had been her daily grind, a way to pay bills and stay afloat. Now she faced unemployment, uncertainty, and that gnawing sense that the world was conspiring to drive her out. Maria tried to reach out to her few remaining friends in town. Some texted back with vague apologies, blaming work or family or their own inability to get involved. Others faded away entirely. She realized that Pine Creek's sunny exterior masked an undercurrent of fear, the kind of fear that made people look away when cracks appeared in their community. At church one Sunday, Maria and Eli found their usual pew occupied. The pastor, usually warm and inviting, hurried through pleasantries and avoided eye contact. After the service, the other churchgoers formed tight circles, whispering, breaking off conversation as soon as Maria approached. She left the church that morning with Eli's small hand wrapped tight in her own, feeling more alone than ever. Bills began to pile up. The landlord, who had once joked with her about squirrels getting into the attic, now left curt messages on her answering machine about rent deadlines. She dipped into her savings, what little was left since Eli's father had disappeared. Each dollar spent was another ounce of security lost. But loss didn't breed defeat in Maria. Beneath her pain, something resolute began to form. She refused to let the lies define her. In the solitude of sleepless nights, Maria made silent promises to Eli and herself. She would not let Jimmy, nor the small-minded people of Pine Creek, crush her spirit. She started recording the changes in her life, documenting every incident, every cold glance, every detail of what she believed Jimmy was orchestrating in the shadows. There were moments, of course, when Maria's courage faltered. When the loneliness felt like an ocean, she'd press her palm to her chest, feeling the erratic drum of her own heart and willing herself to keep going. For Eli, she realized that what Jimmy truly wanted was to see her broken, cowed, defeated. Instead, Maria let her anger harden into focus, her sadness into tenacity. And as she watched Jimmy weaving tighter into the fabric of Pine Creek, attending charity events, handing out donations, schmoozing at the town bar, Maria recognized something new in herself. She was no longer just surviving. She was waiting, gathering strength, and quietly plotting her next move. The storm had arrived, relentless and bitter. Maria stood her ground, battered but not broken, clinging to the hope that one day justice would be hers. She was determined to weather the worst, knowing deep down that the only way out would be through. And in the growing darkness, she began to prepare, not just to endure, but to fight back, rising from the pain. For days after losing her job at the diner, Maria drifted through her small cottage with the ache of disappointment echoing beneath her ribs. The kitchen counter, once her station for packing Eli's lunches and jotting down reminders, became a place she avoided, not out of laziness, but because it reminded her of how much had slipped away. The old floors creaked beneath her feet as she wandered the rooms, uncertain, measuring her steps against a future that felt impossibly uncertain. But despair refused to fully claim her. Even in the most overwhelming moments, when she stared at the unpaid bills stacked on the hutch, or heard the sorrow in Eli's quiet voice at bedtime, Maria clung to something inside herself she couldn't quite name. Sometimes it surfaced as anger, hot and righteous, at Jimmy for poisoning her life. Other times, it was just a flicker of willpower, a voice whispering that if she gave in, Jimmy would have won. Mornings became the hardest. The house seemed eerily quiet once Eli was gone, and every routine had been altered by loss. The diner's clatter and rush no longer filled her days, nor did the small talk with regulars over endless pots of coffee. Instead, Maria began taking long walks through Pine Creek, passing by old oaks and tidy homes, observing the rhythm of a town that no longer welcomed her. She forced herself not to shrink away when she caught someone's sideways glance. Even as isolation pressed in, Maria's pride refused to be silenced. She began to see, through fresh, unblinking eyes, the ugliness of what Jimmy had done. It wasn't just a matter of personal revenge. She realized that what she experienced wasn't unique. Her pain resonated with the silent struggles of others, those who had no voice or had been cast aside by gossip, misunderstanding, or malice. The injustice was broader than Maria herself, and that understanding sparked the beginnings of a plan. It started quietly. Maria, never one for dramatics, approached her pain with the meticulous care of a woman rebuilding from ruin. At night, after Eli had gone to bed, she slipped on an old sweater, brewed chamomile tea, and opened a blank notebook at the kitchen table. There, in the hush, she poured out everything she could remember: dates, faces, snippets of conversation overheard, patterns in the rumors, times and places where Jimmy had appeared too conveniently. She mapped the relationships between townsfolk who had turned on her and sketched out the web of influence she suspected Jimmy to be pulling behind the scenes. She learned not to flinch when she encountered reminders of her isolation. Instead, she took note of them, logged every cold shoulder, every odd look, every neighbor who crossed the street to avoid her. The act of recording became a form of power, a way to claim some agency in a world that had robbed her of it. But Maria understood that truth required more than anecdotes and suspicion. She needed real evidence, something irrefutable. On a worn legal pad, she began listing potential leads: old friends Jimmy had reconnected with, businesses where he had become a sudden regular, even civic committees he had joined in recent months. Her mind, sharp from years of juggling work and single motherhood, began to see patterns. Every place Jimmy touched seemed to turn just a little in his favor. Could it really be just his charm? Or was something more sinister at play? It was on a chilly evening, as rain pattered against the kitchen window, that Maria remembered something odd. A quiet conversation she'd once overheard at the diner. Jimmy in the corner booth, talking in hushed tones to a man Maria recognized as a project contractor in town. The details then had seemed mundane, but recalling it now, she wondered if it might connect to the new city contracts Jimmy had mysteriously won. Maria's intuition flared. She decided to dig deeper. Drawing on her years as a waitress, where she'd learned to blend into the background and listen without being noticed, Maria began to shadow Jimmy's movements. She didn't trail him physically. Pine Creek was too small for that. But she paid attention to where his shiny black truck was parked, who got into it, what times he arrived, and left certain community events. She started taking photographs on her old cell phone, careful to conceal her actions. Whenever she felt her resolve waver, Maria thought of Eli. She couldn't bear to see him retreat further into sadness, to watch him lose the bright, boundless curiosity that once made every day an adventure. She wanted to give him back his home, his community, the life he deserved. Most of all, she wanted to show him that justice mattered, even in a place that seemed to have forgotten its meaning. With each small discovery, Maria's confidence grew. She noticed how Jimmy often met up with a particular group of men in the back room of a bar on Main Street, a place most women in town wouldn't dare set foot. On a hunch, she timed a visit to coincide with their meeting, lingering near enough to hear snatches of conversation about cash payments, unlogged deliveries, and no questions asked. She scribbled notes in shorthand on old receipts she kept tucked in her purse. At home, Maria searched online for information about Jimmy's business ventures, digging up public records late into the night. She found discrepancies in paperwork, permits revoked, partners who'd filed complaints with the state over unpaid accounts. With gloved hands, heart racing, she went through copies of town council meeting minutes, circling every mention of Jimmy's name. Still, fear was never far away. She sometimes glimpsed Jimmy's truck idling outside her house, or received vague, threatening messages from block numbers late at night. But the more she uncovered, the more Maria's fear was replaced by defiance. She realized Jimmy was counting on her to break. He wanted her scared, silent, irrelevant. Instead, Maria drew courage from every hardship endured, not just now, but from the whole story of her life. Slowly, the pain that once crushed her became fuel for something greater. Maria reached out, quietly, cautiously, to others who had suffered from Jimmy's manipulations. A small business owner whose loans had quietly been denied, a young waitress who had lost her job after spurning his advances. She documented each new piece, organizing files, receipts, photos, and written statements with the diligence of someone building a case, not just for herself, but for every victim of Pine Creek's hidden corruption. As winter crept closer, Maria began to believe, truly believe, that her story wasn't over. The pain she had known was real, but it no longer owned her. Instead, it had become the foundation for something powerful and relentless. She was no longer just fighting for survival. She was preparing for vindication. Maria had found her purpose. The road ahead was still long and uncertain. But now, when she looked in the mirror, she saw not a woman defeated, but one ready to rise, to fight, and, ultimately, to claim back the life she and Eli deserved. Gathering evidence, Maria's transformation from victim to fighter became clearest in the meticulous way she set about her mission. Once she had decided that she would not only survive, but fight back, Maria dedicated herself to gathering every detail she could find to expose Jimmy's wrongdoings. While nights were still restless and worry still lingered, her sense of purpose grew sharper, crowding out despair. During the day, Maria kept up appearances as best she could. She picked up odd jobs, babysitting for a former regular at the diner, cleaning houses for folks who still trusted her, filling in a shift or two at an out-of-town gas station. Though every dollar earned was precious, these humble roles also granted her valuable insights into Pine Creek's daily life. She listened, carefully, unobtrusively, cataloging stray remarks and gossip that more and more often seemed to circle back to Jimmy. But it was in the late evenings, after Eli was asleep, that Maria truly set to work. She would sit at her kitchen table with a steaming mug of tea, old receipts and notepads spread in front of her, scribbling down memories and observations. Sometimes she'd replay audio clips she had secretly recorded at public gatherings, a community board meeting, a town fundraiser, even Jimmy's laugh echoing in the background while discussing city contracts with a councilman at Lou's Bar and Grill. Her secondhand phone became her most valuable tool, and she learned to use it wisely, silencing notifications, activating voice recording as soon as she sensed something suspicious, snapping covert pictures from behind her sunglasses. Her strategy wasn't reckless. Maria knew that if she was caught, the consequences could be dire, not only for her, but possibly for Eli as well. She blended determination with caution, moving pragmatically while letting her mounting outrage at Jimmy's corruption fuel her late-night efforts. One of her first breaks came from a local business owner, Mrs. Wilkins, who ran the flower shop on Main. Their conversation started simply. Maria, straightening a rack of greeting cards as part of a cleaning gig, mentioned, as if in passing, the recent surge in contract work for the paving company Jimmy now managed. Mrs. Wilkins shook her head and tipped her voice low. Funny thing that, they bid low, but nobody ever seems happy with the work. And somehow, they always get approved. Doesn't feel right, honey. Maria tucked the comment away, her mind already mapping connections between public money, council votes, and Jimmy's sudden fortune. Bit by bit, Maria wove a network of informants, some unwitting, others quietly sympathetic. She compiled a careful list of supporters. A truck driver friend who'd noticed after-hours deliveries at the construction site. Janet, the young woman who'd lost her job at the diner after rebuffing Jimmy's advances, and who now harbored her own grudges. An old man down the street who had once served on the city planning commission before Jimmy maneuvered him out. Still, evidence had to be more than hearsay. Maria began researching public records. In the public library, tucked away at a corner desk, she learned to sift through digitized invoices and city contracts, noting every inconsistency, payments issued for services never completed, inexplicable gaps in the bidding process, missing signatures. She made copies and sent records to her burner email address. There were moments when fear gnawed at her resolve. Once, while snapping a picture of a hastily unloaded delivery at the edge of a construction site, Maria realized Jimmy's right-hand man was staring straight at her. She pretended to be lost in thought, fiddling with her shoelace, and walked away as calmly as possible, heart pounding in her chest. Later that night, she double-checked the locks on every window and quietly slid a chair in front of the door. But there was more at stake than fear. Each new tip, every pattern or detail she pieced together, offered Maria a sense of control. She organized her findings as if assembling a giant jigsaw puzzle. The audio files named and time-stamped, photos categorized, handwritten, notes digitized onto her secondhand laptop. She created backups on USB drives and hid them beneath a loose floorboard in her bedroom. If something ever happened, Maria wanted her story and the truth about Jimmy to come out. In her small way, Maria became an expert in situational awareness. She scheduled her errands at times when Jimmy would be elsewhere. She disguised nervousness behind neighborly smiles and practiced blending into the scenery so eyes would slide right past her. When she ran into people still loyal to Jimmy or deeply enmeshed in his social circle, she softened her gaze and played along, never tipping her hand. Sometimes the emotional toll pressed heavy. Loneliness, the exhaustion of double lives, the ever-present anxiety that her efforts might come to nothing. Eli was her touchstone. She kept him out of her plans, shielding him from both knowledge and danger. But his presence and his need for stability anchored her. On the rare evenings they laughed together, Maria was quietly reminded what she was fighting for. Her investigation led her to surprising allies. A clerk at City Hall who, after being laid off without cause, confided to Maria about lost paperwork and off-the-books meetings. Tom, the night manager at Lou's Bar, who let her listen to a security camera tape by accident after closing, and whose offhand remarks about Jimmy's visits pointed Maria directly to a hole in Jimmy's alibi on the night public funds were siphoned from a town account. Building the case took time and patience. One Sunday, as church bells rang out, Maria received a brown envelope slipped under her door. Inside, photocopies of check stubs made out to fake companies, all bearing Jimmy's forged signature. She didn't know who sent them, but the message was clear. She was not alone in her mistrust. Maria cultivated her own caution, using encrypted apps when she needed to communicate with her most nervous sources. She researched whistleblower protections in Alabama, scrawling legal hotlines and nonprofit numbers down in a hidden notebook. If necessary, she was prepared to take this fight beyond Pine Creek. The closer Maria got to tying the evidence together, the more she sensed Jimmy growing unsettled. He grew more aggressive at community functions, sometimes sending her warning texts from untraceable numbers, occasionally letting his truck idle outside her house too long at night. But each escalation told Maria she was on the right track. At last, after months of quiet work, her dossier was thick. Spreadsheets, check images, voice memos, photos of illegal deliveries, testimonies from the wronged and the silenced. The file, as Maria looked at it, was as much a chronicle of her perseverance as it was a record of Jimmy's wrongdoing. Maria had learned to survive, not by standing apart from Pine Creek, but by moving through its cracks, gathering secrets like wildflowers until she was ready to make her next, boldest move. Exposing the Truth months had passed since Maria first resolved to fight back. Months filled with sleepless nights, covert conversations, and the slow, painstaking assembly of evidence. She had grown adept at moving through Pine Creek's shadows, never drawing attention, never overplaying her hand. But now, as her folder of proof bulged with documents, photos, and digital recordings, Maria knew that the time had come to step into the light. The choice was no longer only about survival. It was about justice, not just for herself, but for her son, for those Jimmy had trampled, and for a town that deserved to know truth from lies. Maria spent hours preparing. She checked and rechecked every file, every chain of text messages, every time-stamped photo and surreptitious recording. She had backed up her entire dossier in 3 separate places: a USB drive locked in her landlord's basement storage, a second archive quietly mailed to an old classmate who worked as a paralegal in Birmingham, and encrypted files stored online under an alias. Paranoia kept her focused. She could not afford even one misstep. The next step required nerve. Maria knew the Pine Creek police had never been quick to investigate Jimmy. His easy charm, frequent donations, and carefully cultivated friendships with half the department ensured that his slate stayed clean. If she went to them with what she had gathered, and they tipped Jimmy off, all her work could vanish in an instant. And worse, Eli and she could be in danger. Instead, she started with an anonymous email blast. Using a burner laptop connected to borrowed Wi-Fi behind the local library, Maria uploaded scanned images of falsified city contracts, financial records linking Jimmy's paving business to shell companies, blurry nighttime photos of unlicensed deliveries at the construction site, and audio snippets of Jimmy colluding with councilmen. She addressed the emails not just to the local press, but to Birmingham's city desk reporters, state-level oversight agencies, independent watchdog blogs, and the regional branch of the FBI. At nearly midnight, after the send button had been pressed and her breath had finally returned to normal, Maria closed her laptop and walked home beneath a sky thick with autumn stars. The town of Pine Creek seemed silent, the danger dormant, but she knew it was only a matter of time before everything changed. By morning, the town was buzzing. Someone at City Hall had leaked Maria's files onto a local concerned citizens Facebook group. The screenshots spread like wildfire. Old-timers who had once sided with Jimmy shook their heads in disbelief over coffee at the diner. Mothers whispered over schoolyard fences, eyes darting to Maria's cottage in a new light, pity and admiration mingling with lingering distrust. Within hours, the Birmingham Journal picked up the story. Its headline was blunt: "Whistleblower exposes Pine Creek graft scandal." By the afternoon, unmarked cars rolled into town, investigators fanning out across Jimmy's business, the city council building, and the homes of several officials named in Maria's emails. Maria watched from her living room window as Jimmy's world began to collapse. The self-assured swagger she had so long resented turned brittle and frantic when he tried to confront her at her doorstep. The only thing that stopped him from pounding on the glass was the sudden arrival of police officers, this time with state badges, not just local ones. There was no room left for manipulation. Jimmy was escorted away, shouting that it was all a setup, trying to rally his now scattered allies. But the evidence was overwhelming, a latticework of lies, too tangled to explain away. It was not just Jimmy who fell. Several local officials resigned, some under investigation. Public works projects ground to a halt as outsiders scrutinized every contract and payment. For the first time in her memory, Pine Creek felt like a stage racked by uncertainty and introspection, rather than quiet, comfortable routine. Maria assumed that once the news crews arrived and Jimmy was booked, her role would fade to the background. But the town would not let her hide. At first, people kept their distance, some out of lingering suspicion, others out of guilt for the way they'd treated her. Gradually, though, neighbors who had shunned her began to reconnect. Mrs. Carter brought over a pie, her apology clear in the way she lingered on the doorstep. Janet from the diner sent a basket of fresh biscuits and left a note. "Thank you for being braver than any of us." Even the pastor stopped by, not with scripture, but to listen, his eyes full of contrition. On social media, support and admiration flooded in from beyond Pine Creek. Maria's courage made the rounds on local talk radio and was featured in a statewide podcast about whistleblowers. Whistleblower advocacy groups sent emails and letters of congratulations, encouraging Maria to stand proud. For the first time in what felt like forever, Maria sensed a swelling of pride inside herself, mixed, always, with sorrow for what she and Eli had endured. Yet beneath the congratulations and new friendships, there was complexity. The town was forced to confront its complacency, the way it had let friendship, routine, and fear of conflict blind it to the warning signs. For Maria, vindication didn't erase the loneliness of lost friendships or the scars of months spent as a pariah. Healing, she realized, would take time. But as she tucked Eli in at night and listened to his questions about justice and right and wrong, Maria knew she had given him a gift no money could buy, the example of fighting for the truth, even when it meant standing alone. In the days that followed, Maria sat for interviews with local detectives and, later, representatives from the state's attorney's office. She handed over the bulk of her documentation, walking each investigator through the patterns she'd uncovered, how Jimmy had manipulated contracts, paid off officials, even threatened those who'd crossed him. Maria insisted that the consequences must not stop at Jimmy's door, that every voice silenced, every opportunity stolen, deserved to be counted and remembered. Slowly, tangible change began to ripple through Pine Creek. City Hall enacted new transparency policies. The papers carried stories about honest, small-town folks holding their power accountable. And citizens began to show up at council meetings in greater numbers than ever before. Maria was offered her old job back at the diner. She declined, preferring work that let her spend more time with Eli. The cautious hope that had once been her only lifeline was now woven into the daily life of the town. Through it all, Maria remained steadfastly herself, quiet, resilient, unwilling to bask in glory or seek credit. She knew what it had cost to tell the truth, and she knew, in her bones, that the fight for decency and justice was ongoing, not only in Pine Creek, but in towns everywhere. Standing on her porch one crisp morning, a cup of coffee warming her hands, Maria allowed herself a rare smile. The lies that once threatened to crush her had been torn apart by the truth, a truth she'd lived, documented, and finally, bravely shared. And though she would never choose her suffering, Maria Turner understood she had changed the course of Pine Creek forever, and in doing so, had rewritten her own story as a survivor, a mother, and now, an unwavering champion of what is right. Closing, the pride of a single mother. The aftermath of Jimmy's exposure brought a sweeping, uncertain quiet to Pine Creek, as if the whole town exhaled at once and found the air cleared of a long-hidden rot. Yet beneath the surface, life flowed on, as subtle and stubborn as the roots that twisted beneath Pine Creek's oaks. For Maria and Eli, this new beginning was not grand or dramatic. It was made instead from small, ordinary moments, acts of faith, resilience, and renewed connection. Maria's vindication had come at considerable cost. She had become, in the eyes of many, a local legend, the woman who stood up to corruption, who refused to be shamed into silence. Yet legend and reality are often strangers. As the media stories and outpourings of support faded with each passing week, Maria faced the real work of repair. What mattered most was not the past's final reckoning, but the future she could now begin to shape for herself, and above all, for her son. Mending daily life. In the weeks following the turmoil, Maria set about restoring gentle routines. She still rose before dawn to pack Eli's lunch, slid notes of encouragement into his backpack, and watched from the porch as the bus carried him off to school. The kitchen counter, once a site of aching memories, returned to its former role as the heart of the home, alive again with the scent of baking bread and the sound of Eli's laughter. Work changed for Maria, not only in its nature, but in its meaning. Though she declined to return to the diner, she accepted part-time hours at the local library, a place that welcomed her quietly and valued her attention to detail. There, surrounded by books and visiting children, Maria found herself savoring the contrast with the diner's chaos. The library was a sanctuary, modest and unassuming, but honest. She took pride in helping others, finding the right story for a shy girl, keeping the shelves tidy, assisting an elder with online forms. And each act was, in its way, a quiet affirmation of her own worth and dignity. Maria also picked up occasional freelance work from hometown businesses, helping with bookkeeping, event planning, or writing newsletters. These opportunities offered new skills and let her see the fabric of Pine Creek with fresh eyes. She was no longer the outsider, laboring invisibly in the background, but a participant, someone whose opinions were sought, whose tenacity was respected, even when old habits of suspicion sometimes lingered. A changed relationship with the community. Healing in Pine Creek was gradual and uneven. Some wounds, days of isolation, months of gossip, the absence of friends who never returned, could not simply be wished away. But there were gestures she cherished. The librarian's warm greeting each morning, Mrs. Wilkins from the flower shop slipping her extra tulips after Sunday service, Eli's teachers sending positive notes home. Maria understood that trust rebuilt itself like a tree after a storm, slowly, but with surprising strength. She volunteered at town events, baked for the church bake sale, and, after some hesitation, joined a support group for women who had faced public humiliation or bullying in the community. These meetings, often awkward, but sometimes raw and cathartic, deepened Maria's conviction that what she had endured was not just hers alone. Her voice, once quieted by fear of judgment, became a source of comfort and courage for others still finding their footing. On her walks through town, Maria now held her head high. There lingered an ache for the friendships she had not regained, a sadness for innocence lost. Not just her own, but Eli's. Yet this sorrow was no longer sharp. It had been blunted, transformed by her refusal to give up. If she received wary glances or overheard traces of doubt, she met them without anger. Let them see who I really am over time. She would remind herself she had nothing left to hide. Mother and son reimagined. Perhaps the greatest transformation was in Maria's home. Eli, who for months had grown timid and uncertain, gradually returned to himself. The taunting whispers at school ceased, replaced by invitations for play and sleepovers. When Maria heard him laughing with friends in the yard, she recognized the victory was not simply her own. Mother and son drew closer in those months after the storm. Their evenings, free from siege and fear, became a time of gentle ritual. Dinners by lamplight, stories shared beneath quilts, walks to the creek to watch fireflies dance above the water. Eli asked questions about courage, about justice, and about what it meant to be good in a world where people sometimes chose unkindness. Maria answered honestly, always emphasizing that even grown-ups could be scared or make mistakes. But bravery meant standing for what was right, even when it was hard. Through Eli's eyes, Maria discovered new pride in her role as a single mother. She had been both shelter and guide, teacher and protector, even when she felt lost herself. she came to understand
Oh no.
that her worth was not diminished by pain or failure. Rather, it was forged in hardship and proved by her love, constant, unwavering, and patient through every trial Pine Creek threw her way. Legacy of quiet strength. Maria's journey did not make her famous beyond the boundaries of Pine Creek. After the initial rush of attention faded, life settled back into its slow rhythms. But for those who paid attention, Maria became something far more enduring than a local celebrity. She became a quiet symbol, a testament that dignity, perseverance, and self-respect mattered. That single mothers, often overlooked or patronized, could hold their own against adversity and inspire change in the lives of others. Some evenings, Maria sat with a cup of tea by the window, reflecting on the road that had brought her here. She thought of the girl she'd once been in Birmingham, the young mother scrambling to survive, the frightened pariah clinging to hope. All those selves lived within her still, but they no longer defined her. Instead, she felt a steady pride, an unbreakable thread running through days of sorrow and joy, challenge and triumph. She also looked ahead, quietly nurturing dreams for the future. She hoped to save enough money to send Eli to a good college, or maybe one day return to those old ambitions of starting a bakery. But she no longer based her happiness on wishes deferred. Her real wealth lay in the lessons she now carried, her sense of self restored, her son's laughter, the certainty that, whatever came, she could face it with courage. A new day in Pine Creek. The season cycled on, and Pine Creek healed inch by inch. Along with Maria, the town's story, and hers, was far from over. Each morning as the sun crested the trees, Maria felt gratitude for the life she'd reclaimed and the pride, not just of survival, but of having lived true to herself and for her child. She moved through the world quietly, but boldly, as all the best heroes do. And so, against all odds, the single mother once cast aside became a beacon, a living, breathing reminder that even those knocked lowest by life can rise again, shape their world, and inspire a whole community to hope for better. That was, and would always be, her legacy.